our research workers and also researchers from this side. May I ask the organizers to link the slides? Did Sarah? Yes.
There we go.
Thank you. Okay. So hepatitis Delta virus, I will start with the introduction. I will have a brief elaboration of the introductory parts about the hepatitis Delta virus. It is life cycle, the genomic organization, and also then I'll discuss the researches which has been done in Ethiopia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So hepatitis Delta virus, hepatitis D virus, is which is described by some as the smallest sneaky virus because it's a defective virus which needs the presence of the hepatitis B virus for its survival. And it was found from the history, as you know, in 1977 by the Italians when they found individuals from a liver pathology of patients who presented with severe forms of an acute hepatitis. Later, they identified that this virus actually is stained differently, and it's only present in individuals with hepatitis B virus infection. So Mario Rizzetto in 1977 has described maybe it is likely a new virus. So it was described after that. It's a very small genome, single-stranded negative sense RNA virus with a small nucleotides also. As you see, it is around 1,700 nucleotides. So from this diagram, you can see it has small and large delta antigens, and it is surrounded by the surface glycoproteins of the hepatitis B virus. So the hepatitis B envelope with an empty envelope will lead to the entrance of these large and small delta antigens, and it will be surrounded by the helper virus, which are the middle, small, and large glycoprotein, and it's only present in individuals who are infected with hepatitis B virus infection. It's important to have some point about the replication of the hepatitis D virus. So this is as a whole the ribonucleoprotein. As we have said, these are the small and the large hepatitis D antigens surrounded by the hepatitis B surface antigen with its glycoproteins. This is from the part of the envelope. Then the first step or the initial phases are actually related to the entry of the virus. In 2012, actually, by Young has identified after this the receptor, which is the entry for the hepatitis B virus and also the hepatitis D virus. They share the same receptor, which is a sodium taurocolate co-transporting polypeptide. And this is also an important target site for the drugs that target actually hepatitis B and also hepatitis D infection. This early phase of hepatitis B and hepatitis D virus, they are usually the same because they share the same receptor here. After this, the next process is very also important, uncoating and enter into the nucleus. The second phase is likely occurring in the nucleus is actually peculiar to hepatitis D virus. It's very interesting to see what called the double rolling circle of formation of the genome and the antigenomic RNA, which is a covalently closed circular RNA, and it's made by the polymerase II in the nucleolus. Likely also some studies showing polymerase I could be involved. So this antigenomic RNA may act as a template for further production of the genomic RNAs. This process, as you see, it continues, vice versa. So it's likely replenish the stores of the genomic RNA, and the genomic RNA leads to the messenger RNA, and further translation will occur and formation of the proteins. And it's also formation of the ribonucleoprotein can occur also, and this ribonucleoprotein can also lead to the formation of the translation into the different proteins formations. And the third step occurs actually the assembly. There are also drugs that like prenylation inhibitors which act at here, and release will occur. It's important to see here that one important target is at sodium taurocolate, the entry inhibitors, and prenylation inhibitors are coming. Interferon is actually the only drug that's widely used to be ineffective, but there are a lot of hopes to see. So we have seen that hepatitis D virus is defective. It's present with the hepatitis B virus, but when you see the life cycle, actually, they didn't share many things except the entry parts. As seen the hepatitis B virus, the entry phase is only the one they share. Further process actually of the hepatitis B virus is really complex, like the forming of covalently closed circular DNA and DNA synthesis and peculiar reverse transcriptase enzyme, which is important in the DNA synthesis and also targets for hepatitis B virus. So the current treatment that we give for hepatitis B virus, even though it can cause viral suppression, still the hepatitis D virus will not be affected by reverse transcriptase inhibitors. So you can see they actually target the different sites for the hepatitis B virus treatment. And after we see this important life cycle and the virology and the history, it's important to see how is the mode of transmission of hepatitis delta virus. So it's important to always remember that it requires the presence of hepatitis B surface antigen, but in the transmission, there is a peculiarity. So vertical transmission of hepatitis D virus is actually considered to be rare. Infection during early childhood, I want to stress here that for hepatitis B virus also, horizontal transmission is an important form of transmission for hepatitis B virus in Sub-Saharan Africa, like countries which are having more than 8% prevalence of hepatitis B virus. This is different from Asian or American countries, as you see. So probably in American, sexual transmission could be considered the most common. Hepatitis B virus is rare. In Asians, where the hepatitis B virus is high, and it's mostly vertical form of transmission. Here, unidentified causes or exposures during childhood, and this transverse form of transmission is common for both Hep B and hepatitis D virus infection. Sexual transmission is also considered to be one form of transmission in hepatitis delta virus. When you see practices that are common in Sub-Saharan Africa, also traditional practices are common, like scarifications. Whenever individuals have some sort of pain in the abdomen or different areas, they will have scarification that could probably use similar needle exposures, and percutaneous exposures are an important mode of transmission. Special risk groups which are higher, and we can see in the different case control studies or the prevalence of the antibodies in different groups. Those who have HIV infection have higher hepatitis delta, multiple exposures to blood and also syringes are an important mode of transmission. And in general, hospital care and easily contaminated materials that can be used in the hospitals are also major form of transmission. So physicians are also at risk. They need to have safe hospital stays, like starting from the gloves, and everything should be safe. And the most important prevention, as you see, would be vaccination. After we see the mode of transmission, the hepatitis D virus is considered to be an immune-mediated liver injury. As you know, hepatitis B virus is mainly also an immune-mediated, but there are some studies which show that hepatitis D virus could also have direct effect on the hepatocytes. So it could also have direct injury to the hepatocytes, and further necrosis and inflammation may occur. But in general, immune-mediated liver injury predominates, and we have two forms of presentations. The two forms are like the super-infection. So these are patients who are either carriers or patients who have cirrhosis who presented with a super-infection. So they will be infected in a patient with underlying infection, and the others are co-infected. These patients usually manifest an acute infection. The virus, both Delta and B, are present at the same line. After I said this, I'll try to put the hepatitis B and hepatitis D virus kinetics just as an introductory part, so that we can differentiate or diagnose the super-infection and co-infections. So this is a typical scenario in co-infections, data from the CDC. And patients with a co-infection will have an acute presentation. So this patient will have, we have discussed the transmission route, so they will have an exposure from this transmission and or exposures. And this patient will initially manifest with hepatitis B surface antigen. And if we measure the IgM of the anti-hepatitis D virus could be raised, and if we measure the total anti-hepatitis D virus, it will also be raised. Patient will present with severe symptoms, elevation of the ALT, jaundice will occur, and this patient could have an acute fulminant course of infection. Later, within actually 6 months, actually both of the hepatitis delta and the hepatitis B will clear, and they will have only probably the 12 anti-hepatitis D virus up to probably 8 months, and they will have anti-HBs. One peculiar thing in hepatitis delta is a patient who has been infected or who had a previous infection will not have any marker for delta like after 8 months or so. So you diagnose only anti-HBs, and if you measure the core, anti-HB core will also be positive. That shows a previous infection of hepatitis B, but you cannot really clearly see whether he had past hepatitis delta infection. So in general, the co-infection is clinically indistinguishable from a patient presenting with an acute hepatitis B. It's usually acute and self-limited, and it's followed by clearance of both viruses, especially injection drug users. It's associated with high frequency of acute liver failure, and in the natural history of the disease, we'll see how could these co-infections progress in the host. And the next part will be about super-infection. So this is an individual who have hepatitis B. So we have said hepatitis B is a hidden epidemic because most patients may not be symptomatic. So these carrier patients who are asymptomatic patients may present with a sudden worsening, or you'll have another scenario where you have a patient with hepatitis B on follow-up, on treatment, in which their viral load is suppressed, so they present suddenly with exacerbation. So in this patient, the surface antigen is positive, and if you measure the hepatitis D virus RNA will be positive. There is a high ALT levels, and patients are symptomatic. So sudden exacerbation of symptoms. Initially, it could be anicteric, later followed by jaundice will occur. This patient will have the total anti-HDV antibody, and ALT level is important, and IgM of the anti-hepatitis D virus. To mention some of the things like hepatitis D virus RNA, for example, may not be present in all patients, even in co-infections, like 85% of them may not have the co-infection, so making it even more difficult to diagnose. So we need always to have a close suspicion in individuals with controlled infection or a patient with a serious worsening of infection who had been asymptomatic. So to summarize, so it is like a severe hepatitis in a patient, in previously diagnosed patient, or hepatitis B surface antigen carrier, or a known patient with exacerbation. And in these individuals, hepatitis D becomes chronic almost in 90%. So when you compare super-infection versus mono-infection, hepatitis D infected individuals, almost all of them are likely to have a chronic infection, which could progress to cirrhosis or cancer. The co-infected patients changing into a chronic infection or a resolution may occur, but super-infection is the one which is the most severe form of hepatitis. So if you have seen the basic parts in the kinetics, it's important also to see the natural history and how hepatitis delta is different from C and B. So hepatitis C, in general, hepatitis C and B are considered viruses with little interest, but hepatitis D is even more because we are not discussing about it. But when you see the natural history, hepatitis delta co-infection would be more serious than this. So acute hepatitis C patient, if you have an individual exposed, so the likelihood of going to chronic hepatitis C could be around 75 to 80%. If you follow these patients within 20 years, around 10% will have cirrhosis. And the annual risk after having cirrhosis is 45% liver failure, an annual risk of 1 to 3% of cancer, and an annual risk of death could be 3 to 4%. If you see patients with hepatitis B, as we have said, hepatitis B is a sort of not directly cytopathic, so it depends on the host immunity. So those individuals who are infected during infancy or neonatal period, 90 to 95% of them will go on to have a chronic hepatitis B. Actually, that's why we are advocating on birth dose or immunoglobulin, because those infected in the adults are not the ones which are highly likely going to develop chronic Hep B. If you don't prevent them at the young age, 90%, 95% will go on to have chronic hepatitis B. After this, around 30% are likely to have chronic infection. And from these, 40% of them will develop either failure, cirrhosis, or hepatocellular carcinoma. What will happen if a patient is super infected with hepatitis delta? So it depends whether it is co-infected, as we have said. Fulminant course could occur up to 2 to 10%, and some size up to 10-30% may have chronic infection. But the problem is in patients having super infection, 90% of them will have a chronic infection. So almost all of them are likely to have a chronic infection. So this is the one which makes it more serious, severity. And the other is also the duration. When we have seen the duration is like 10 to 20% in Hep C after 20 years. But usually the chronic thing occurs like in 10 years. So it's a decade earlier and it's the most severe. That's why hepatitis D is considered the most severe form of viral hepatitis. It progresses early, and almost all patients are likely to have a chronic infection. From this, 70% of them are likely to have liver failure, cirrhosis, and hepatocellular carcinoma. So this is really one of the neglected or forgotten diseases after discovery of the last 40 years, but no much as such progress has been made, even though it is presenting as severe form of a disease. So Hep D is responsible for most severe and difficult to treat hepatitis. Severe fulminant acute hepatitis cases occur in patients with co-infection. It rapidly progresses to cirrhosis and cancer. So it progresses like a decade earlier than we expect from Hep B and C. And the annual rate of cirrhosis and cancer, we have seen it is high. So with this, there are some strong recommendations. So this work could look strong, like a screen for hepatitis D virus in all carriers once you diagnose them or once you plan them to initiate antiviral therapy for Hep B and when there is worsening. So we'll see if this is really supported by the guidelines after we discuss the epidemiology. But considering the severity and the rapidity of occurrence of the disease, such recommendations has been contemplated. And there's another thing that I want to share here is the viral dominance. As we have seen the virology, hepatitis D and VB, they occur together. And hepatitis D actually uses hepatitis B machinery. So it hijacks the hepatitis B machinery. So it dominates it. And also actually in vitro studies have shown that the S form of the hepatitis D could inhibit the hepatitis B virus mRNA synthesis and stability. So these studies and also other mechanisms have shown that hepatitis D virus, when it occurs, it suppresses hepatitis B. So the typical patient is a patient with hepatitis B, and when you measure the viral load is suppressed, yet having raised ALT, advanced fibrosis, and E antigen is negative. If you have such kind of patients, almost all the guidelines recommend to test them for hepatitis D virus. Yeah, after ruling out actually the most important cause, like probably non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, probably in the West, which is very common, alcoholic liver disease or these other conventional causes should also be ruled out, but hepatitis D virus should be screened. There are atypical scenarios in the cases that are present here in the literatures. we also see atypical scenarios. It has also been written, published in literatures, atypical presentation of hepatitis D could occur, and these individuals could have high viral load of hepatitis B. The ALT levels could fluctuate, and they have a progressive course, and it has seen that individuals are also having hepatocellular carcinoma. These scenarios could occur in African. We have an African consortium study of liver cancer, in which I have also contributed from Ethiopia. We have seen that hepatitis B virus occurs in young age, and it is associated with rapid progression. And it looks there is another synergistic factor that could play a role. It could be hepatitis delta virus here that could portend hepatocellular carcinoma. So it needs further study. So there are atypical presentations of hepatitis D virus. So if you are just following the typical scenario, you might miss. That's why the previous slide has also recommended to treat while you initiate hepatitis B virus treatment. So if you see, the epidemiology is also interesting. It doesn't have any specific geographical distribution, as you all know. So there are some pockets of high prevalence areas. So from when you see from the CDC data, so in Africa, for example, in the Horn of Africa, like the Sudan, Central Africa, having the highest distribution. In the northern part of South America, the Amazonian basin, and also the eastern part of Europe and Pacific Islands, we're having the highest prevalence. In the Middle East, we're almost having the intermediate prevalence in this region. This is important to know because it's really interesting, as shown in other literatures also. It has specific geographical distributions. There are pockets of different areas having a higher prevalence of hepatitis delta, while in the same country, the other regions are not affected. So if an individual going to study one location, the prevalence could be even 0, yet having a higher prevalence in the other setups. So it says that in total around 15 to 20 million people has been thought to be infected by hepatitis delta. We have seen Eastern Europe, the Middle East, the Central Asia, northern parts of South America, and I'll supplement the data on Sub-Saharan Africa in our next topics. So the prevalence of anti-hepatitis D virus antibodies, this study was published on Lancet. It's very nice because it has studied wide areas of Africa, and it has studied in the general population. And the one on the blue line that you see are those who are studying with the HIV and those with liver disease. One thing that you may comment is also, it is only the antibodies. Further RNA test might be important. So in this study have shown that the Central Africa is having the highest prevalence. I have seen, you can probably see here, Gabon having a prevalence of like 66.1% in the general population in the Central Africa. Eastern African countries, Western African, like general population is around 7.33%. In the cancer patient, it's high, 9.57. East Africa is not well studied, as you see here. The ones I mentioned is Tanzania and other countries like Malawi. Usually these are the Southern Africans. So it says it is 0.05%. The previous CDC guidelines have shown that the Horn of Africa has been having higher prevalence. In this study, it has not been shown that. And the other thing, when from the general population and liver disease, it shows an odds ratio of 5.24. So the odds of having chronic liver disease, if patient is infected with hepatitis D virus, is really high. Probably some wide confidence interval is due to the different sample sizes. So the pooled overall prevalence of hepatitis D virus was 8.39% based on the antibodies. This is really high, a significant number of hepatitis D virus prevalence. And the genotype distribution is also very wide, as you see. Main genotypes that had been AIDS genotype 1. Studies in Cameroon and also studies in Nigeria currently have shown that. East Africa, probably I would supplement the studies. And The other genotypes are genotype 5, 7, and 8. So this varied geographic distribution and genotypic distribution have also shown that some studies have said probably hepatitis D originated also from Africa with such varied genotype distribution. And also studies from like Turkey and other countries have shown that Hep D virus genotype, which is an ancient form of genotype in genotype 1, has been found in those areas. So it's important to know the geographical area so that you screen also individuals who move from this status to when they present to low prevalence area. So in Africa, it said 1 and up to 5 to 8 are the most prevalent, also in Sub-Saharan African countries. So once we have seen this prevalence, which is a pool prevalence of 8%, which is significant, and also the genotype distribution, we have seen that the genotype 1 is ubiquitous. So how is the severity or the progress in the genotype 1 versus genotype 2? So this study have shown that genotype 1 individuals are actually having a cumulative survival which is lower compared to genotype 2, and this has been seen in both an acute hepatitis, also in patients with chronic hepatitis. Genotype 1 has been shown to have an increased risk of fulminant failure. In patients with chronic hepatitis, it was also associated with rapid progression to cirrhosis, risk of hepatocellular carcinoma 3 times higher, and mortality is also 2 times higher. So genotype 1 could portend a poor prognosis from those who found. And in genotype 1b is actually the most common one from the different studies. So this genotype is prevalent here in Africa. And if you have seen the severe forms of presentation, and it's actually affecting 15 to 20 million people, if you are considering 5%, then we need to see the guidelines. So we know that the World Health Organization has set an ambitious goal of elimination of viral hepatitis, and it has a lot of sets, targets for hepatitis infection, treatment, and care. And when seeing the WHO on hepatitis D, actually it puts how we can prevent, treatment, and everything. When I go down to the WHO response, it says WHO does not have specific recommendation on hepatitis D. I don't want to be much strong here, but I think if you are considering elimination, we need to strengthen care of hepatitis D virus. I know a lot of things could be associated with hepatitis D virus care, starting from screening, diagnosis, treatment is difficult, but I think even having data could support. If you have a good data on hepatitis delta, that could also support in the care of hepatitis B virus, like in the prevention aspect. So I think it should have a strong word on hepatitis delta by the WHO. I have seen the different guidelines. Actually, I have tried to mention different things, but the one which is inclusive, I found it the American Association for Study of Liver Disease, 2008. It puts to test individuals who are at risk, and I will show on the next slide which individuals are testing is recommended, and it even recommend periodically testing, like patients probably with exacerbation, and the typical patient which I have said. So patient with suppressed viral DNA, but yet having high ALT or advanced fibrosis to test, and even uncertainty. So if the physician has also suspicion that this could be from hepatitis delta, uncertainty also it's important to test. And it's recommended to test within these serologies of anti-hepatitis D virus, followed by RNA, hepatitis B viral DNA to be checked. And it's recommended to interferon alpha 12 months, but recently actually 48 weeks of treatment is recommended. So these are individuals by ASLD high risk groups. So it includes persons born in regions with reported high hepatitis D virus endemicity, so West Africa and Horn of Africa. As I've said, data from Africa is scarce actually, so it's difficult to include only the Horn and West, because we have seen that the Central African have a higher antibody tests. So data, we need to have more data from Africa, from different parts of Africa, to recommend or to exclude individuals from testing. And the Asian countries, which have said having the highest prevalence, Pacific Islands, Middle East, the Eastern Europe, and South America has been included. Persons with injected drugs and MSM, and patients with Hep C and HIV. We have seen that HIV patients having a higher risk of hepatitis delta, any history of sexually transmitted disease or multiple sexual partner. We have said that the sexual transmission is also an important risk. So individuals with elevated ALT and AST, so these are individuals with suppressed viral load yet having raised ALT. So these individuals are considered high-risk groups and to be tested for hepatitis delta infection. So when I come to our studies here in Ethiopia, so I am from Ethiopia, East African country. The current population, so it is a largely populated country, as you might see. So these are according to June 3 estimates. It's more than 109 million people. And the estimated prevalence of hepatitis B virus is around 9.4 to 10% from unpublished study, which was done by the Ethiopian Public Health Institute, which is a research institute, and which uses actually around 10,000 samples. So we have seen that we have a higher prevalence of hepatitis B. Just to share one slide on the history of hepatitis D virus here in Ethiopia from the previous studies. One pioneer physician, Professor Hailemichael, had been doing studies on hepatitis delta. Initially, it was 2.7% among patients with viral hepatitis. In military recruits, they have found that it is around 5.8%. And another study, which is a hospital-based study of 1886 to 90, so that 24%. These are patients with cirrhosis, so it has shown an increased prevalence in those individuals who have cirrhosis. Then I'll show you our cohort of hepatitis B infection, which we are doing here to our knowledge, which considers the largest cohort of chronic Hep B patients in Ethiopia. As this study was done by Dr. Hannah Abarra, who is my colleague here from St. Paul's Hospital. So we established this treatment program here at St. Paul's Millennium Medical College. We recruited many patients. The initial aim was actually to show that this forgotten site to show the hepatitis B care and treatment is feasible in a resource-limited setting. With that aim, we also screen patients for hepatitis delta. So we have recruited around 1,267 patients for this advanced analysis of hepatitis delta infection. These are the different tests that we have done, and probably we'll discuss in the challenges. Getting hepatitis D virus serology is difficult, and hepatitis B viral load, hepatitis D virus RNA, hepatitis D virus genotype. I will give a great emphasis to this guy in France, which is this center is accredited to do also actually hepatitis delta from Emmanuel Gordon. He has helped out in this. We used FibroScan for liver fibrosis assessment. This could be one limitation, as yet hepatitis delta, it's not really validated yet for hepatitis delta, but it's validated for Hep B and Hep C. Using that, we have used FibroScan to assess the liver fibrosis. We don't have FibroScan in our country in wide scale, but we have it with the research project, with the help of this research project in this hospital. So just to show the one interesting thing, we have said that geography is an important factor in the characteristic of patients. Here you see the two spots here which are having higher prevalence of hepatitis delta, even though it is small sample size. This area around Afar area is also from the previous study, which I have said hepatitis B virus prevalence to be 9.4. In this area, it was around 28.8% prevalence of hepatitis B virus has been documented. So this spot is also having high hepatitis B and hepatitis delta, probably a sort of at a border, probably migration into different cities from this could play a role. So statistical significant association was found with the geography and also the liver fibrosis assessment. Hepatitis D virus infected individuals were having a higher liver fibrosis scores. The prevalence was from hepatitis D virus antibodies with the diacerin assay. 25 samples were positive. Then when we used another assay, the diapro, it was 19 were confirmed positive. Overall, hepatitis D virus prevalence was 1.5% from the study. Using the RNA to show the active infection present, it was 0.9%. So this comes to show that 2/3 of the individuals having active infection. But the other thing is, the hepatitis D, as it is an RNA virus, one thing that I'm afraid is probably the sample handling and transport. It's transported from here to Norway, and RNA test was done in France. So the sample handling could affect us. It is an RNA virus, and the other thing is the sensitivity of the different tests could play a role. But in general, 1.5 prevalence was found from this study. From this sample size, when we assess the association with liver injury, the LDT levels were higher in individuals with hepatitis delta infection, and the median fibroscan was also 10.7 versus 5.8 kilopascal in this individual. So higher liver enzymes, which we consider as marker of inflammation, and also a median fibroscan, which is marker of probably as a fibrosis was raised in individuals with co-infection compared to the mono-infected individuals. And we have seen these 12 individuals. Actually, sequencing has been done for these 12 individuals. And when we see the association with mortality, majority of the mortality occurs also with this. And you can see patients who develop hepatocellular cancer, other patients of same has died. One patient lost to follow-up. We don't know. We couldn't trace the patient who couldn't come to follow-up. And mortality was significantly associated with active hepatitis D infection at univariate analysis. And the crude odds ratio was 5.3 with this confidence interval. You can see it's wide actually because of the small sample size. The other thing that you can see is the relationship between the viral load of the hepatitis B and Hep D. It isn't, for example, for this patient who is in care, both of them were actually high, and fibroscan 7.6, but yet having higher liver enzyme. Patient who had hepatocellular cancer were having both higher viral loads of hepatitis B and D. The patient who has died were actually having a high hepatitis D viral load, yet he was having like the classical patient with suppressed viral load and very high fibroscan, usually more than 10. And from West Africa study for on Hep B, more than 9.5, we consider cirrhosis. So 36.8 is really a higher number of fibrosis. Viral load is suppressed and having high hepatitis delta. When you see the genotype, all of them were genotype 1. And this also shares with the other African studies like in the Nigeria, which have the CRN 200 African marker rather than the alanine, which is more common in the Eurasian. So probably it shares the African marker. You can see further the sequencing on this study. Also, Balayhun et al. Has also studied, and he has sequenced around 6 hepatitis delta virus. All of them have shown that there is a clade homogeneity. All of them were clade 1. If you want to also see the hepatitis B virus genotype, we only found hepatitis genotype D and A in our cohorts, and this we are associated with the hepatitis D virus genotype 1, which looks actually typical and African genotypes from the evolution. So in Sub-Saharan hepatitis D virus prevalence was 1.5%. It was associated with raised ALT, as we have seen. I think it is important study showing big impact. So I would like to acknowledge, if you allow me to acknowledge 2 people from here, like Nagga Barhi, who brought this study actually to Ethiopia. He's overall PI of this study, and Asger Johansson from Oslo University Hospital, who trusted us to come to Ethiopia St. Paul Hospital, and he has done a lot of things for this study. This is not yet formal. We try to make it Ethiopian Norwegian hepatitis support or care group. So I would like to acknowledge all of this who take part in this research. Another study which I'm being involved with is a case control study to assess the impact of hepatitis delta virus. Here I can just go on the summary part. You can see from controls around 180 patients with healthy controls positive for anti-hepatitis D virus, it was 3.8. But when you see for patients with chronic liver disease who has cancer, the levels is really high. And this study is a multi-center study. It's a case control. We also study on hepatitis B virus, genotype, and the like. Support also has been done from Leipzig, Germany. Dr. Ayerad is also doing his laboratory work on this study, and it's ongoing. Probably will share it when it's finalized. Other studies that I want to share from Ethiopia is this the 6 hepatitis D virus sequenced. This study is different is that it includes HIV infected, co-infected individuals, chronic liver disease, and blood donors. And you can see that a patient with hepatitis B viral load in the HIV group, we are having undetectable viral load because they are having treatment. In Ethiopia, Sub-Saharan Africa, patients with HIV get free treatment. And there is one individual who is also having a triple infection with Hep C. If you add Hep D, it's also a quadruple infection. This individual is having a significant WHO stage 4 disease. And when you see the two individuals who have sequencing, they are having an advanced liver disease. This individual's viral load of Hep B was not suppressed in these individuals, and they are 60 and 30 years. You can see the genotype is A in these groups. The blood donor was also having a high hepatitis D viral load. He was asymptomatic, probably. He may need treatment as both viral loads were high, and the genotype was D2. And this study have shown on summary from this 121 patients. If you see the prevalence in different groups, blood donors were having 3.2% prevalence. In HIV, it is high, around 8%. Chronic liver disease, 12.7%. So it increases in those with this. And as I've said, it shares the same serine at amino acid position 200, which is considered actually an African marker. And there was a clear homogeneity. One thing that is in red here is that's also important probably for research purpose also. Individuals with HIV have also lamivudine exposure, and this lamivudine exposure causing the YMIDD mutations, all of them were tested were negative for the antibody. In the next slide, it shows there are two things: how hepatitis D virus dominance is impaired probably in these HIV infected individuals. There are different variants of mutations which has been identified, concomitant mutations at this genome, or hepatitis B virus drug resistant mutations, which is the YMIDD mutations. And we have seen that more than 80% of the hepatitis D antibody positive were having high viral DNA. And one speculation is probably the amino acid sequences in the C-terminal domain could have an effect on the hepatitis D virus particle and lose its potency to be the dominant factor that we have discussed why hepatitis D virus has been dominant. And the drug-resistant mutation rate was 29.3% in HIV infected. This study, one limitation is it has studied in one northern part of Ethiopia, in one part of only. It could have been better if it includes also other parts of Ethiopia. And the other thing is it also has probably recommended us to study even hepatitis D virus is dominant has been impaired, and hepatitis B virus patients who are suppressed and having occult infection might also need a study for hepatitis delta. I think for researchers, this is an important area of research. Recently, I have also communicated with my friend from Kenya, Dr. Paul Yonga. This study has been in 1986, actually. Recently, he's trying to do some study on Kenya, and it shows wide geographic variation. I've seen that it was 31% in the northern part. When they see the study in the southern, it's 1%. So the geographical variations are something to see. The treatment, I have just 2 slides to show. So there is no effective cure, as you know, and PEG interferon is the only therapy, and patients could have frequent relapse. So SBR is replaced with maintained virological response in different setups. fulminant hepatic failure patients respond actually to liver transplants. There are a lot of things, but they had a best outcome. These are the different drugs up to March 2019 that I have seen. So there is a big hope in the future actually for the hepatitis delta treatment. So when it comes to hepatitis in general, this is general hepatitis in Sub-Saharan Africa, the prevalence is thought to be around 8 to 10% in most countries. Some say 60 to 65 million people, and current extrapolation say it could be around 100 million. From these, 5 million or more could be affected with hepatitis delta virus infection. So unlike the probably in the other countries where we have specific segments that we screen, like the baby boomers or patients with MSA, IDU, we don't have such known high-risk groups in Sub-Saharan Africa. So it is a generalized epidemic. We cannot selectively localize and screen individuals. The other challenge we have is the biological and molecular tests are really unacceptably expensive. They are not available here. And centers like laboratories that we send, they send them to Germany for further analysis. And hepatitis B virus patients, they pity that they get free drugs only if they have HIV infection. So I'll show you in the progress. We are just following the natural course of the disease and may end up in hospitalization, and this is actually unfair. So if you start from the first thing, the epidemiological data, the awareness campaigns and civil society is extremely low here. And so data is very important. We need to have more data, and then we have to have awareness campaigns. Civil society should have strengthen here. And the prevention aspect is very important. First dose vaccine in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's said to be less than 10%. And when you try to see the different programs, there is no first dose vaccine under the national program, and hepatitis B immunoglobulin is not available. When you see the cost, hepatitis B vaccine, the first dose vaccine, can be found around 35 USD. For immunoglobulin is difficult to get, and it may cost around 100 USD. It's usually found in the black markets, and usually I see it unreliable, and it's difficult to rely on that. So these basic parts are not well done, and I put a star here. Hepatitis B virus vaccination prevents from Hep D in individuals who don't have previous hepatitis B, and I think this is very important to concentrate for our setup. If you don't, so if patients come, then the next step is a diagnosis. So I'll try data from the international clinical laboratories, which you find it here. Some of them, they do it here, and the others, they send it abroad. And the costs for the IgM could be 80 USD, and the RN is 202 USD. So there is an insurance system in many Sub-Saharan African countries, and it's out-of-pocket service. So it's really unaffordable for those. So these tests are expensive to do. When you come to the drug therapy accessibility, even for hepatitis B, only 1% of chronic carriers are able to access treatment, and it is worse for Hep D, because when you see the peg interferon cost, it could reach up to 15,600 USD, and they need to import it, and it's really expensive. Hep B patients, they get free drug only if they have HIV infection, and they could have good care there, and this should have been changed. So WHO recently, also in 2019, have also complained about this funding issue in viral hepatitis program. This is one big problem. So as I've said, we are really failed in following the natural course of that disease, which had happened previously in HIV. So these patients, without diagnosis, without treatment, without prevention, it's obvious they come to hospitalization with decompensation, with cancer, which we don't have actually. Even we don't have hospice care is not widely available in different Sub-Saharan African countries. So it affects the whole, actually, the patients, the families, and the neck could be affected. So the problem, the healthcare system is actually out-of-pocket payments, and as I've said, laboratories, sterilizing materials. And here I said lack of political. So actually the data is very important. Then if you have the data, and we have shown the collaborated with the Western, shows that it can be preventable and treated. So the next thing that should come is political will and commitment. This is one big gap, and the Ministry of Health should have strong programs. And the needs or opportunities for improvements that I have put to summarize the awareness campaigns. Hepatitis Delta Network is a good website that I recommend for hepatitis D. It's the only one which I have seen actually for hepatitis Delta. So we need to collaborate with African countries, associations to have like a collaboration. A lessons should be drawn from HIV now, which we are also following the natural course of the HIV probably previously, and now it has got a political will and policy and partners are there and its own treatment. It should happen the same for HIV, and these are some of the needs or opportunities for improvement. The recommendation I have is universal protection of healthcare workers. Hospital safety is important. Vaccination for hepatitis at birth instead of starting at 6 weeks. Drug availability in general, pharmaceuticals have tried their best, but more should be done. So collaboration. So unacceptable global inequalities occur, so collaboration like that we have doing in Norway, seems like it's very important. They are showing that it's feasible treatment, for example, for hepatitis B in resource-limited countries. So as I have said, across Sub-Saharan Africa, hepatitis does not receive the attention that HIV did in 2000 from NGO and civil societies. So the involvement is very important. Government's prioritization of the health agenda. The health sector, if you see the budget and everything is very low in the health. So this should be put in the prioritization of the health agenda. So in conclusion, the hepatitis D virus is overlooked and not routinely reported. We have seen clade homogeneity in the Ethiopian studies. It is a severe form of viral hepatitis with rapid progression to hepatocellular cancer. More data is needed, probably hidden support and like we expect. Current therapies we have seen, and I would like to stress on the prevention. Super-infection, we need to educate to reduce risk behavior because super-infection, we cannot give vaccination. It cannot help to prevent. Once the patient has hepatitis B, well, it doesn't prevent, but co-infection can be prevented by pre or post-exposure prophylaxis, which includes the vaccine and immunoglobulin. And this is my final quote from the WHO director in the last WHO 72. It's very important, and I like it. That's what I'm sharing. So it says countries must invest in programs that keep people healthy and out of hospitals. Prevention is not only better than cure, it's cheaper. So I think we need to stress on this very important aspect. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Desalegn. We'd now like to begin our portion of the webinar where we're able to take some of your questions. As mentioned at the beginning of the call, we'll start by answering questions submitted to us in the chat box. If you would like to submit a question now, please do so using the question field on your screen. So we did have a question that came in during the presentation. The first question for Dr. Desalegn, what do you suspect is the most common way that people become super-infected in Africa?
Okay. Thank you. As I've said, super-infection, the most important means is different forms of transmission, like which are associated with, like when patients are having pain or abdominal pain, they may go on to scarifications, or they could have needle injections, repeated needle injections. These unsafe forms of transmission are important forms of super-infections likely. But
thank you.
Still, it needs further study actually.
Thank you. Another question is, what do you think about the new clinical trials, the trials for lonafarnib and Mercludex?
Okay, thanks so much. I have seen this progress in the entry inhibitors. So especially in the different presentations with the entry inhibitors with the PEG combination that have really shown, actually, I have seen studies showing a better outcome. So these entry inhibitors, I think, could probably benefit not only the Delta, but also the hepatitis B virus infection, because studies have shown that they suppress the hepatitis Delta and also the hepatitis B. So I think there is a good promising studies. We would be also like to be involved in such clinical trials.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Someone's asking if there's any certain diet they should follow when co-infected with hepatitis B and Delta.
This is very important question. In our side in Sub-Saharan Africa, also in Ethiopia, when a patient is infected with hepatitis B, they are actually advised not to take protein meals. And recently, I have published a study on BMC Gastroenterology, about predictors of mortality. I just included the malnutrition as showing an important predictor of mortality. So avoiding such protein diets that I want to stress from this side, probably avoiding such protein diets is not really recommended, because they are usually advised even when they are diagnosed with hepatitis B or hepatitis D. So it's the most important thing is to have a limitation, even they may need a higher dose of proteins. The other thing is when they have hepatitis delta, late night snack has been studies have shown that it is quite useful, and they need to have also supplements in vitamins, minerals. So a balanced forms of these things are important, but avoiding alcohol, and in our setup, people usually go to herbal medications. Avoiding that is the ones that I usually stress.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Okay.
Another question is, how can chronic hepatitis B patients prevent hepatitis delta?
Okay, this is very interesting question. So as we have said, the patients with hepatitis delta can prevent co-infection with vaccination, but the super-infection comes when they have risky behaviors. So the risky behaviors which we have mentioned, probably in the different countries, injection drug users, MSMs, or multiple sexual partners. In our setup, also avoiding these traditional forms of treatments like scarifications. And we need to stress on the hospital safety. The physician should be provided well-equipped safety materials, starting from always using the gloves and everything in the hospital, sterilization. These are very important things. And screening and the like are also important to prevent super-infection.
Thank you. Someone else is asking, how difficult is it to find a liver transplant in Africa?
Very, very difficulties actually. So when a patient comes with late stages or with end stage, usually we send them abroad, usually to India. They're likely going there, so it's expensive. It could cost them up to 50,000-60,000 USD there. So yet we don't have a liver transplant center here, but for example, St. Paul Hospital and other biggest hospital, the Black Line Hospital, are planning to have in advance, probably for the next 5 years, to have such care, but yet we don't have. So people they're likely to go abroad for such kind of treatment.
Thank you. So I think we have time just for one more question. Somebody's asking, are you aware of any awareness campaigns about hepatitis going on in any African countries? Or perhaps Ethiopia, if you may be able to speak to that.
Yeah, very important, very good that this question has been raised. Actually, as part of the Gastroenterology Association, we are always doing this Hepatitis Day events. We try to reach people through different platforms like medias, but I don't think it's still strong enough. We need to have more advocacy groups. And recently, the patients have also gained license to have their own organization, Ethiopian Liver Health Association. So this patient association. And the other thing in Africa, so in the meantime, I can put the name Kenis, probably if you know Kenis Kabagambe. We are both EthNoHep advocacy and also visionary. He is the director of the African Hepatitis Summit, which will be going on recently in June 16 to 18. So that will be in Uganda. That's also an important platform to reach many pupils, many stakeholders, from policymakers, physicians, researchers. That African Hepatitis Summit is an important platform for this increasing awareness campaign.
Great. It's very helpful. Thank you, Dr. Desalegn. I believe that's all the time we have today, but again, I want to thank you for your wonderful presentation and taking the time to answer some questions today.
Okay, thanks so much for
Thank
the
you.
audience participation too.
So thank you again, everyone in the audience, for joining today, and thank you for your helpful discussion. If we weren't able to answer your questions today, we will reach out to you privately, and also don't hesitate to contact us. We have our email on the screen, and we also have Dr. Desalegn's email. Please remember to fill out the survey after the webinar and let us know any suggestions for future webinar topics. Also, look out for a message from us, which will include materials from today's webinar, including a recording. We greatly appreciate any feedback you can provide us as you exit the session. And thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.